Today I'm here to ask you a simple, straightforward question. Have you ever experienced that moment when a conversation ended hours ago, but in your head it's still happening? You're lying in the dark, reviewing every word you said, every pause you made, every expression that might have been misinterpreted. You reconstruct the entire scene, what you should have said, what you shouldn't have said, what the other person really meant. And then you replay it all again, and again, as if your mind is stuck in a loop you can't turn off. It feels like obsession, it feels like anxiety, but in reality, it's something much deeper than that. It's your mind trying to protect you from something it learned to fear. What if I told you that this habit isn't a sign that you're neurotic or overly sensitive? That in fact, it's an intelligent response from your brain to an emotional environment that at some point wasn't safe enough for mistakes. First, let me tell you something. You're not crazy, you're not dramatic, and you're definitely not alone. This behavior of replaying conversations in your head doesn't happen because you're weak or because you can't let things go. It happens because your brain learned, probably very early on, that anticipating errors is safer than being caught off guard. That reviewing every detail of an interaction is better than risking disappointing someone, losing connection, or confirming some deep fear about who you are. Your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do, protect you. And that makes perfect sense. The problem is that this protective mechanism never turns off, even when the threat is past, even when the conversation ended well. So why does this happen? Let's start with the most obvious, but also the most overlooked. You're not actually reviewing the conversation. You're reviewing what you felt during the conversation. It's the difference between remembering the words and remembering the feeling of vulnerability, exposure, of not being in control. When you replay an interaction in your head, you're not trying to understand what the other person said. You're trying to process what you felt when you said what you said. Simply put, you're trying to avoid feeling that again. Think about how many times you've reviewed a conversation where everything went well. Probably few. Now think about how many times you've reviewed a conversation where you felt you made a mistake, that you said the wrong thing, that the person was too quiet, or that you revealed something about yourself that you shouldn't have. Countless times, right? This happens because your mind doesn't care as much about what's real. It cares about what's dangerous. And if in your past, emotional safety was unpredictable, if you grew up trying to guess someone's mood, or if you learned that your words could change everything, then your brain developed a hypersensitive radar. It learned that every word matters, that every tone of voice can change how people see you, that every silence can mean rejection. And now it can't turn off that radar, even when you're in a safe environment. Even when the other person didn't even notice what you think they noticed. Your brain keeps analyzing, keeps looking for evidence that something went wrong, because that's how it learned to keep you safe. The second reason, and this is the part nobody tells you, is that replaying conversations gives you an illusion of control. In the actual moment of the conversation, you're vulnerable. You don't know how the other person will react. You can't predict if you'll say the right thing or even forget your words. You are, in a way, at the mercy of the moment. And for someone who grew up needing to control every variable to feel safe, that's terrifying. But when you replay the conversation afterward, now you have control. You can pause, rewind, change the script. You can imagine better versions of yourself. You can test different responses. You can rewrite the story until it makes sense, until it makes you feel competent, in control, or at least a little less exposed. It's like watching a movie where you're the director. You can adjust everything until you feel less vulnerable. The problem is that this never makes you feel better. In fact, the more you replay, the more you reinforce the belief that there was something wrong with what you said, that you need to fix something, that you failed. But here's what's interesting. This habit isn't just about anxiety or perfectionism. It's about identity. When you replay a conversation, you're, deep down, asking a much deeper question. Who was I in that moment? And is that person I was acceptable? This happens a lot with people who, at some point in their lives, felt their identity was constantly being judged. That who they were wasn't enough, or was too much, or needed to adjust depending on who was in the room. If you grew up not knowing which version of yourself was the right one, then every interaction becomes a test, and every conversation becomes a performance review. You're not just reviewing what you said, you're reviewing whether you were the version of yourself that people will accept, whether you were too authentic, whether you were too distant, whether you were funny enough, interesting enough, present enough. And because that answer is never clear, you get stuck in the loop, trying to figure out if you passed the test. There's still another thing you need to know. This behavior changes with age, but it doesn't disappear. When you're younger, you replay conversations because you're trying to figure out who you are. You're testing versions of yourself in real time and then analyzing which one worked. But when you get older, the reason changes. Now you're no longer figuring out who you are. You know who you are. But you still replay conversations because you're afraid that who you are isn't enough, or because you showed too much, or because you realize that even after so many years, you still care too much about what others think. And that can be disorienting, because you thought you'd get over it, that you'd stop caring. But the brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't get over emotional safety patterns. It just learns new ones. And until you consciously teach your mind that you're safe now, it will continue to use the old strategies, even if they no longer make sense. But I'm going to tell you the truth that changes everything. This habit doesn't exist to punish you. It exists to regulate you. When you replay a conversation, you're not being obsessive. You're trying to return to a state of emotional balance. You're trying to mentally resolve something that was left emotionally open. It's like when you can't sleep because your brain hasn't stopped processing the day. It's not insomnia for insomnia's sake. It's your mind saying, wait, there's still something unresolved here. Replaying conversations is, in fact, a form of self-soothing. It's your brain saying, I need to make sense of this. I need to understand what happened so I can feel safe again. And because you haven't learned other ways to process uncertain emotions, you use the only tool you know, mental analysis. You repeat the conversation until it stops making you uncomfortable, until you find a version of it that your brain accepts. The problem is that this version rarely arrives, because you're not looking for a real version. You're looking for a version that makes you feel in control, accepted, or less vulnerable. And those versions don't exist in the past. They only exist now, in how you choose to relate to who you were in that moment. So what does this mean? It means that replaying conversations isn't a flaw, it's a strategy. It might not be the most effective, it might leave you exhausted, it might make you feel stuck, but it's not random, it's purposeful. Your brain is trying to help you in the only way it knows how. And maybe, just maybe, the solution isn't to stop replaying conversations. Maybe it's to understand why you need to, and slowly start creating new ways to feel safe that don't involve redoing the past in your head. Not because what you're doing is wrong, but because you deserve to rest. And because the version of you that exists now, today, is already enough. Even if the conversation wasn't perfect, even if you said the wrong thing, even if you were exactly who you are, you don't need to be different. You just need to believe that who you were in that moment also deserved kindness, including your own. Thank you for staying with me this far. If you liked it, leave a like and support the channel. Subscribe to receive more of our content. See you next time.